will make a start. So, afternoon, everybody. My name's Nicola Mann, and I'm an acting director for people for Brentwood Borough Council and Rochford District Council, and I'm also a board member for PPMA. So, I'm going to be the host today on the webinar, and the webinar is around improving performance through a cultural MOT. We're lucky we've got more than one speaker today. So we've got Alistair, Andrew and Martin, who will all be presenting to you all today, and I will hand over to them shortly. Just housekeeping, keep on mute while we've got the presentation going. We will be recording the session, but only the speakers are shown. So that's all you'll see when we release the recording. And if you've got any questions, if you could put them in the chat box, that would be really helpful. And then obviously Alistair, Andrew and Martin will just obviously check on the chat as we go through. And there's plenty of time at the end to hopefully get through those questions. So I'm going to hand over to Alistair, who's going to take control of the screens, and I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alistair Mitchell-Baker from Tricordant, and it's great to be here with my colleague Martin Reddington from Kinetiq and Andrew Melling as well from Smart Cities. And so let me share the slides. I'm in control of the slides, but let's get going. So we're really pleased that we can talk about this topic of improving performance through a culture MOT. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, will be familiar with the best value standards that Michael Gove and colleagues at DLUHC produced last year. And they talk about 7 key areas that you can see here that they've identified are really critical to local authorities being able to deliver best value, and their assessment of how local authorities are doing with that. And obviously that becomes important all the time, but particularly important when there are any challenges with performance or finances, and organisations either moving into or at risk of moving into the Section 114 process. And it's interesting that when you look at and you read the documentation, one of the statements it makes is how important the culture is of cooperation, respect, trust within members and officers, and the commitment to transparent decision making. So there's quite a lot of it in the guidance around this topic of culture, which links strongly into the other areas around governance, leadership, and continuous improvement, particularly. And we're going to focus on the how of how you make progress in improving culture. It was said by Ranyan De Silva, but I think other people have said this. Bill Tate in particular, Professor Bill Tate has used this analogy. Organizational culture is water in a fishbowl. If the water is clean, nourishing, energizing, fish survive. But if the water's toxic, the fish will die, leaving the infrastructure valueless. The role of leadership and of people professionals working with leaders is to, can we create really great fish bowls for our staff, our colleagues to thrive in, so the culture is really creating value and allowing the organization to perform well. And if you're going to do something about that, one of our heroes, Deming, said that you need to put everybody to work in the company, in the organization, to accomplish the transformation. Transformation is everybody's job. The improvement of an organization, what it's doing, and its culture in particular, isn't a job for just the people director or the chief exec. It's a job that needs everybody. So how on earth do you do that? What we're going to talk about in the next few minutes is the how of how you go about measuring your culture and getting everybody to work, and then making sure that what you do aligns to your operating model, and you can actually move into effective delivery of your action plan. So I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to talk you through the measurement process in the Culture MOT. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Alistair. If you want to move on to the next slide for me, thank you very much. So the Culture MOT, as the name implies, is testing the environment, finding out what's working well, where you might need some advisories, urgent things that need doing straight away. Quite an interesting idea, and the process leading to the current way of doing things, the Culture Fit Model 2024, it's had 12 years of development, extensive research and development over that time, predominantly in the local authority sector. I've worked with the Local Government Association collaboratively for the best part of a decade in deriving what is a very useful model. And Alistair, in his opening, gave various depictions of what culture is. And of course, there's the famous, we call it a mantle term, a gross simplification, which of course, well, culture is just the way that we do things around here, which is fine as a catchy phrase. But when you're then asked, well, how do you do things around here? How do you describe what you do around here? How do you measure what you do around here? That's when you need some really useful tools to understand what's happening, within the workforce. And just very recently, as Alistair said, the latest guidance from DLUHC has been produced, and this now affords the opportunity to organise the data in a way that maps against those standards, and it gives you then a really good opportunity to explain what's going on in your organisation to a variety of audiences, but particularly, if you have a peer review group coming in, or you have commissioners or something like that, being able to show that you're adopting the best value standards and measuring against that can only be a good thing. Thanks, Alistair. On to the next one. So how does this tool work? This is the latest iteration of the tool. You can see some navigation ideas up on the left-hand side there. We're looking at the overview at the moment, which is shaded orange. And in overview, the Culture Fit model, its components, or lenses as we call them, are available to look at there. We sometimes talk about a kaleidoscope. You can sort of turn that shape that you can see there, that hexagon, around, and it exposes different lenses, ways of looking at the data and explaining the data. And only today it popped up on my phone, a consultant in the NHS saying that legislation around whistleblowing needs to be significantly tightened up if we're not to get another situation like a Lucy Letby case coming through. And the reason for that, the consultant said, is that it's all too easy for organisations at the moment to identify whistleblowers and then enact retribution on them, smother them, remove them, from view. And so we need greater protections. And one of the things that we look at within this model is the idea of psychological safety and how safe you feel to raise concerns without fear of being targeted for retribution. So quite a useful sort of memento came through today. We move on to the next one, Alistair, thank you. You'll see the shading has now changed in that navigation area to key drivers. Now, this is something that can be incredibly useful. So when you have a lot of measurements, a lot of statistics, tables full of numbers, how do you decide which are the things that really are important, where you need to direct your efforts, and which things you can regard as useful and informative, but not requiring immediate attention? Key driver analysis is a way of doing that. So you select a target, as it's called, or an outcome of interest. In this case, it's employee engagement. And using multiple regression analysis techniques, you can find out which of the items being measured are actually having the greatest impact. In fact, it's a causal relationship on the target. And in this particular case, this is real data, incidentally, we've got here. You can see that there's a driver representing every lens within the model. Doesn't always work out like that, but in this case, it did. And most notably, look at the scores for these key drivers. They don't have to be especially high or especially low in order to feature as a key driver. They can be in the moderate zone, but they're still there as really important things to look at. On to the next one, Alistair. Thank you. This is looking at heat mapping. So statistics, you can play, we often say within our team, you can play symphonies, sometimes not particularly pleasant symphonies, but you can play symphonies with statistical data. It's quite precise, you know, things that you can do. Free text is much more messy, it's unstructured, but in there you've got so much layers and textures of information that sort of add to the statistical information. So to have the benefit of both combined really gives you enhanced insights. And using the latest techniques, AI techniques, you can actually do thematic analysis of free text, sentiment weight it, as you can see here. And then I'm just showing an example of a free text from an inspiring zone, as we would call it, where things are working really well, and from a toxic zone where things are not working particularly well. And you can see the contrast in the sentiment that's coming through there. And finally, for this sort of whistle-stop tour, if you can move on now to the next one, Alistair, it's going back to best value, the very point Alistair mentioned at the beginning, that you can now configure the data in order to give a representation or an expression of how you look against these values. In this case, you get a rating of 65 out of 100, but it's a wonderful way of being able to organize your information and make it intelligible for a variety of different audiences. And of course, the next step, I'm now going to hand over to Alistair, is making sense of this and running it through into action planning and beyond. Thanks.
So thank you, Martin. So the question then becomes, as Martin said, is if you do an MOT, you find out what are colleagues saying about how things are working out at the moment. How do we actually go through together to work on that? And I've repeated Deming's quote here. How do we put everybody to work on this issue? So I have to be honest, if you want to put everybody to work on the issue, it requires a level of courage and a real openness to genuinely listen to people in the organization and a commitment to do something about it together. But our great belief is that if you empower people who everybody I think I've ever met working in a local authority, and between us, we've probably worked with 100 authorities across the country of different shapes, sizes and types, are passionately committed to doing the best for their local residents and want to see the council succeed. So how can we engage with people is what we would like to suggest as a process. So we've got a model that using a mixture of small and large group workshops to really make sure people understand what's coming out from the work that's being done, making sense together, because obviously the data that Martin's talked about coming through from the surveys will give you amazing insights, but you can put it together with people's experience and other data you've got so that together there's a shared understanding. We want to make sure everybody's got access to all the data. Then the next bit we do is to have a workshop where you'd work together to say, so what does that mean for the council as a whole, but for different functions? And move then into action planning. And the key bit about how we do this is that we would have microcosms, small cross-sectional groups that would represent different levels and potentially people with different perspectives into the planning process. So it's not just coming from one perspective. And as you do that, you get into action planning, you get more intelligent action planning because you take account of different perspectives, but you also get the energy that people own and contribute towards something. There's an old saying that people support what they help to create. And if you enable your people and people in the organization or the system to work together to create solutions and plans, they will be committed to delivering those in a way they aren't at all if they're just given to people. So that's the second workshop. That's what we call kind of going from reflecting from what into so what. And then the final phase, now what, is all about how do we actually deliver priorities over time through transition, aware that, you know, there might well be a review or an external process we're getting through. And then, as we know, it's always good to reflect on, so what's actually happened, what do we learn, ready for the next iteration. And I'm going to hand over now to Andrew, who's going to talk a bit more about, so how do we make sure that action planning is aligned and really effective? Andrew, over to you.
Hi everybody. Hi everybody. Thanks to the PPMA, first of all, for allowing me to speak to you today alongside my colleagues at Tricordant and Kinetiq. So I'm Andrew and I'm currently on an assignment with Slough Borough Council, and a lot is happening at Slough, as some of you might be aware, if you keep a close eye on the plethora of local authority news stories. So as I'm sure you'll appreciate, I'm not going to speak in any detail about precisely what I'm doing at Slough. What I can say is that while I've been in my existing role since November, Slough is more than 2 years into its Section 114 recovery journey, and as the latest published letter from the Commissioners to the Secretary of State of DLUHC illustrate, SBC is being challenged over its demonstrable ability to stand up on its own 2 feet, become financially stable whilst being able to withstand future financial shocks and put its residents first. But another significant charge has been the underwhelming ability of the council to grab the culture nettle, which the commissions themselves have pointed to as being one of the root causes of Slough's issues. So since November, I've been tasked with setting up the CEO's office and integrating that into the new TPMO with a number of other colleagues within the council. I've also been given the responsibility of being the architect of Slough's target operating model and putting into place a clearly articulated and visually recognisable delivery plan to ensure all of that happens. So Martin and I, leading up to that, Martin and I have worked closely over the past few months, along with Caroline Adlam, who I know is also on the call, on better understanding the existing culture of Slough. So we use something that Martin has used, which is the FIT model, and as this slide really clearly demonstrates, leadership, culture and behaviours now sit right at the centre of what we're beginning to do around the detail of developing of the operating model, and it's increasingly being recognised by CLT members at Slough as one of the primary key drivers. So part of my role has become quite evangelical about tapping into that rich seam of goodwill and passion, passion obviously being a quality that can't be taught, but which is innate. So this has been about helping our leaders to understand the importance of them placing an intentional focus on culture and people, a focus that accounts across all levels of the workforce and the varying speeds at which they as individuals evolve. So the rest of my presentation isn't going to be about the work I'm doing in Slough, but some of the emerging realisations really that echo very much the experiences of every single one of the businesses and local authorities I've previously worked with over the past 30 years. So if we can jump onto the next slide, because this slide clearly shows development of the target operating model is extremely huge and complex, made more so by the critically short timescales that we are working towards to bring it into line with the 2025-26 financial budget setting process. However critical it is to put people at the centre of change and transformation, I think it's still fair to say that SBC's corporate leadership team is only just realising how challenging it is to put that into practice. Personally, being a turnaround or crisis manager in both the public and private sectors, and with Slough now being my 23rd local authority since focusing exclusively on public sector organisations in the wake of the 2008 to 2010 economic downturn, I recognise many council leaders on transformation journeys, whether or not they're driven by the financial or operational distress, are focused intently on how the transformation will impact the operating model, the organisational structure, technology, data, and even the roles are required. But too often, they consider the reality that as these components of their council evolve, so too must the culture, their people, and employee ways of working in order to create sustainable change. So why is shifting culture and mindset as important as getting the target operating model right? Next slide, please. What's different today is the speed at which we get information and make trade-off decisions to operate most effectively. Just as many councils recognise that data-driven decisions are critical to their operations less than a decade or so ago, today's council leaders are showing early signs of similar recognition about culture and mindset. There's a realisation that structure alone won't help teams recognise information that's relevant, especially when speed is critical. Ecosystems and the relationships within them are also evolving at faster rates than ever. Organising to be able to share relevant information across the end-to-end value chain is about more than breaking down functional silos and investing in cross-functional teams. Council leaders, teams and individuals need to develop new capabilities, and leaders must provide guidance to build those capabilities across the micro cultures while empowering people to collaborate in very different ways. So the change required to deliver cost reduction, as depicted in this and the previous slide, not only requires a strong transformation capability, which is underpinned by clear governance and processes, but more critically is of the culture, meaning the mindset and the behaviours needed to make it happen. My final slide, please, sir. So how can we recognise where culture impacts transformation to ensure that strategies are effective and teams can co-design successful ways of working? So let me just, before I go, let me share with you my 5 tips. First, empower the teams by removing the command and control mindsets and invest in the capabilities to lead by example at every level, not just among the senior execs. Secondly, open the communication channels between teams to respect and integrate the value from the varying perspectives and ensure the end-to-end value chain is considered when making the decisions. Thirdly, identify the touch points throughout the journey of the change in the little and often to recognise positive cultural shifts and integrate them into the planning and execution. Fourthly, leverage the principles of people-centred design and behavioural sciences to help people adapt to change at different speeds. And finally, invest in the many types of continuous training and learning, from critical thinking and communications to harnessing the power of data and digital tools. Remember, cultures that support continuous change and transformation don't create themselves. So if your council is showing signs of distress, my call to action to you is to listen, as you listen to this, is to reflect on the elements of your own culture that made you successful up to this point, and then co-design a new end state with your teams at all levels, and guide those teams and guide the leaders to try to get them to find new ways of working, leaving room to evolve over time. At that point, I think it's time for me to hand over back to Alistair. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So we will make sure a copy of the slides will be set through. I'll make sure there's a larger version of my previous slide that somehow had shrunk. My apologies. So I think it's over to you, Nicola, for any Q&A that folks have got. Would be great.
Yes, no, thank you all for that presentation. Really useful, quite timely for me where I am, because we've just had a peer review. So I'm like taking it all in. Need to make sure my water bowl's clean, don't I, for my fish. So no, really helpful. I can't see anything in the chat at the moment. Has anybody got any questions of Alistair, Andrew or Martin while we've still got them for the next few minutes? Quiet, so no, everybody's obviously taking it all in.
Guys,
and
don't be shy. Don't be shy.
I think Rachel's also said very timely, and I actually think, you know, for many of us in the public sector, it is very timely. There's a lot of challenges we're all facing, so it was actually really useful for me, definitely. So have you got any parting comments you want to share with the group before we conclude?
As I said, we will put round the slides for everybody. We'll also drop you all a note to have a follow-up conversation if you'd like to, just to, you know, kick around what your particular challenges are. As you've heard, Martin will have surveyed over 50 councils. Andrew's done turnaround and improvement in 23 now. We've done large scale whole system work in a few dozen. often with other partners. So there's a whole range of experiences we've got, and we're happy just to chat stuff through initially with you if you want to. So because we recognise what a big challenge it is, but we'd love to chat more, and we'll make sure our contact details are on the slide set, but as I said, we'll also drop a note.
Perfect. Well, thank you all again. It definitely was really, really useful, and I'm sure you'll get lots of contacts in the not too distant future. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nicola.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.